Hey there, welcome back. And today we are going to make this animation and in the process learn a little bit more about the simple deform and curve modifier. So let's get right into it. All right then, so we have this default scene in Blender right now, and we're going to go ahead and use this to create that model. So our process will go like this, is that we're going to first create the model and then create the spikes around it, and then we'll go ahead and texture it, right? So there will be cards or there will be timestamps available in the video for you to skip to them if you'd like. So yeah, so to begin with, what we're going to do is we will take our default cube. Well, the very first thing I'll do is I'll delete the light and the camera, and we'll add them back if we need them. And yeah, I'll select my cube and I'll scale the cube on the x-axis, right? So I'll press S and X and just scale it right up to these two grid lines that you see here, right? So I think this big should be good enough. Now the next thing we'll do is press tab to go into the edit mode and do Control R to add a loop cut. Now I'm going to add a total of 30 loop cuts, and if you guys don't know how to see the number of loop cuts that you're adding, you can just look at this section over here which says number of cuts, right? So I'm going to go up to 30 and say okay. Just press escape to make sure that the loop cuts are applied. So once I have added that, now we are going to go ahead and add the simple deform modifier. So let's go to our modifier properties and then click on add modifier and simple deform modifier. And as soon as I add that, can you see it's already twisting it, right? Because it's by default set up at twist. You can do a lot more with this modifier, so I'm going to go into detail a little bit and digress, but the reason for this video is to explain the modifiers as well, right? So basically it gives you different options. The first one is to twist. You can even bend it like this, and the higher you go, the more bended it gets. And then you can taper with it, like this is another use of it, and then you can stretch it, right? Like basically it stretches your model out. Plus you can define the axis that you want to do it on, like basically X, Y, or Z axes. And then restrictions is restriction is just here to tell Blender as to how much of your model do you want to deform, right? Like if I reduce it, it's only gonna go ahead and add that deformation onto a part of my model, right? So it can be useful in some cases. Similarly for this as well, if I go ahead and click on the limits and move it around, just limits the amount of deformation that's adding to the object. Again, you can lock your deformation to either y-axis or z-axis. Depending on what axis you have selected here, these options will change. So if you select y, it will give you an option to limit x and z, right? So that's pretty much it. There's a vertex group that you guys can select and just only deform a certain section of it. I'm not going to go into it because that doesn't have anything to do with our model right now, but you guys feel free to explore it if you want to. Now, apart from that, once we have the simple deform modifier added in here, I'm going to increase the twist to 360. You can see here. Then I'll add a subdivision surface modifier and change it to simple. And let's move it above the simple deform modifier because right now it's messing with the original geometry and I don't want that. So I'll give it 2 subdivisions and let's apply scale. And also I'll go ahead and click on object and origin to geometry. Now once I have that, I have this nice twisty looking shape. I want to do a little bit more to this, right? So basically what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make sure that both of these sides of this object are pointy. But I don't want to go ahead and reduce this face because it's going to look odd. So for that, I'll go to the edit mode and click on this option that says Propotional Editing, right? Now the shortcut is O for that. Now I'll click on S for scale. And can you see this circle that just comes around it? That is the area that is going to affect, right? So you can just scroll your mouse wheel up or down to change the amount of area that you're going to affect. Now I'll scale it down and I want a little bit more space to be affected, right? So I'll just scroll it a bit up and yeah, just scale it down to this. Now I'll do the similar thing on the opposite side as well. I'll press S and then scale it down and change the radius depending on how much I want it. So I think this looks good enough. And I'm going to do a right click, shade smooth, and go to the object data properties and click on normal and auto smooth. Now I have this nice looking shape available here, right? So the next thing we'll do is we'll go ahead and create those spikes around it. Right, so let's hop into the edit mode once again, and now what I'm going to do is I'll do a shift A to add a new object, but this is different, right? So whenever you actually add an object in edit mode, it just adds an instance of the original object. So the object will not be recognized as a separate object, but just a part of the object that is already existing in your scene, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and add a UV sphere, and let's move it up. Oops, let's switch off proportional editing and let's move it up. GZ is what I'm gonna do. Now it looks really big. I don't want that, so I'm gonna go to like number pad 3 on right orthographic view, and just go ahead and move it on the Z axis somewhere around here. Looks okay. I'm gonna scale it down a lot and then scale it on X axis. So for that I'll do S and X, and well, as soon as I do that, it only scales it up on the X axis, right? So just make sure it's sitting right on the Y axis, and let's make it a little bit bigger, not that much. Okay, yep, this looks pretty good. Now the next thing I'll do is I'll add another spike. Right now that's really easy. So since this object is already selected, I'm gonna do shift D and do G Y to move it on the Y axis, and just bring it around here to a similar length. And I'm gonna add 2 more, and yeah, you can add as many as you want depending on how you want your object to look like. So I'm gonna add one at the top and do a shift D again and add one at the bottom, right? So as soon as I do that, I've got this nice twisty looking shape. Now I can mess with it since it's one object, so any changes that I do affects everything. So I'm gonna do SX again, so make it a little bit more wider, and I've got 4 different spikes around it, right? So now we're pretty much done with the modeling. There's a slight change that we need to do later on, but we'll go ahead and do that when we are actually texturing it, right? So once we're done with the modeling, let's go ahead and get into the animation part, right? So we already got our modifier in here, which is a simple deform modifier, and here it's giving you an option for origin, right? So, and also giving you an option to select another object over there. In place of that, I'm gonna go ahead and add a curve, which is a Bezier curve. So it looks something like this, right? And this is what is actually going to give it that animation where it actually goes ahead and twists around its axis, right? So let's go ahead and add it, and I'm just making the curve a little bit bigger and adding a little bit more vertices in there. The shortcut for that is E for extrude and R for rotate, right? So gonna go ahead and quickly do that. Now this is to make sure that I have a path where that this object is actually going to go ahead and follow later on to create that kind of circular animation, right? So let's select both of these and click F to join them. Now we have this nice weird looking curve around this. All right, so the very first thing we'll do is we'll go back to our object, go to the modifier, and in the origin we're going to select the Bezier curve. Now what happens is that this curve enables this object to go ahead and rotate around on the x-axis. Now it will only rotate around the axis that you have selected. If you go ahead and try and rotate it on any other axis, it's just gonna come out weird, right? So like for example, if I go ahead and move it on the Z, it just stretches it out really badly, and I don't want that. So since we are moving it on the x-axis, I'm just going to go ahead and increase the value here, and can you see it's already giving you that effect, right? So that is one part of it. Now to make it follow this entire path that we just created, there is the other modifier that I just talked about. That's the curve modifier. So we're going to click on add modifier again and curve, right? And then you can see this curve object. Select your Bezier curve in there, and yeah, I know it's looking weird right now. It's just because it's moving as per the curve. So if you don't like the shape, just go ahead and move some vertices around, and that's gonna fix it. So once we have that in the curve modifier as well, you can just simply select the axes that you wanted to go ahead and deform the object on. I'm going to keep it to x-axis because that's what I want. Then we've also got the vertex group again. It only, if you want to limit it to only a certain vertices, right? So just FYI, then that's pretty much about the curve modifier, to be honest. So we're going to go ahead and animate this. Now there is one thing that we need to keep in mind. So let's go back to our object properties and go to X and just look at the location that it's on when it says 0, right? So it's this location. So we are going to go ahead and right click and insert keyframe. Now let's go to the frame that you actually want, how long you want your animation to be. Like for example, I want it for 251 frames, so I'm gonna go there. And just FYI, I'm using this timeline below here. If you can just bring it up like that. So frame 251. Now I have to go ahead and check that how long does it take to actually complete this entire rotation, right? So let's, or the revolution. So let's go ahead and increase the size and try and see how long it's gonna take. So I think this is pretty much it. So it's about 84 meters, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and add that value. And when I run it now, can you see it's just following the path already and just looks amazing. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the animation piece of it. Now we're gonna go ahead and texture it out and just give it that amazing glowing look with a glassy effect outside, right? So let's go ahead and open our shader editor here. So I'm just gonna add a new window and let's bring our object in focus. Let's go back to frame 1. Okay, so our object is now in focus and we're gonna edit this one, right? So yeah, let's bring in the shader editor, and over here I'll also go into the render mode and let me quickly add an HDRI here. Yep, the HDRI is in, and I'll also enable ambient occlusion, bloom, and screen space reflection. And let's make sure that we are enabling refraction over here when we come in, just to make sure that when we add a glass texture, all the settings are enabled, right? So I'll go ahead and do that. I'll also increase my render, the samples to 100, and also go to fill right here and click on transparent. And the last thing I'll do is go to color management and change it to very high contrast. The look, I'll change it to very high contrast. So once I am done with all of that, let's start shading, right? So the first thing we'll add is a glass texture. So I'll take this material and I'll delete the principal BSDF. And if you're not seeing anything here, just go ahead and click on new. And that should give you a new material, right? So I just have the material output in this here now. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and add glass BSDF, right? So to do that, Shift A, search for glass, and there it comes up. Or you can click on add and just search for it in shaders, right? So we'll take the BSDF and glass BSDF and put it into the surface here, right? So now it looks like glass already, because we made sure that we clicked on the refraction option here. But we also want to go ahead and click on, like, go to material properties, click on settings, and change this to alpha blend, and change the shadow mode, or the blend mode to alpha blend and shadow mode to alpha hash, and make sure screen space refraction is enabled, right? So once we have all of these settings enabled, let's go back to a glass texture and change the IRO to 0.9. Because that just gives it a very nice effect when we actually add another shader in there, right? So once we are done with this, right, now we're gonna go ahead and create that glowy effect inside of it. Now, in order to do that, let's go to the edit mode first. So there are a few things that we need to account for, right? So first thing I'll do is I'll increase the scale a bit here, and so we are gonna go ahead and edit these 4 circles that are around there, or the 4 UV spheres. So how to do it simply? So go to the edit mode, go to the right orthographic view and do a Shift D. So there it duplicates the original object. Then I'm gonna click Alt S and then press Z or Z, right? So what it will do is it will only make sure that I'm scaling on the X and the Y axis, and not scaling on the Z axis, right? So that is really important. So let's scale it down a little bit, just to the point where it's not actually interacting with itself, right? So I think this looks pretty, okay, this looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and add another texture and just assign to it, and we can later on change it, right? So once this is done, we're going to repeat the same process for the other as well. So to select the entire object, all you can do is press Ctrl L. It selects everything that is related to that object, and then again we're going to repeat the process. Okay, so we have the material right inside this. We're gonna do the same thing for the object in the center as well, right? So Control L to select everything, Shift D, and Alt S and Z. We got another object in there. Yeah, this looks pretty okay. So I'm gonna assign the new material over here as well, right? So we have our object with a glassy cover outside and a new material inside. So we're going to use this material and create that emission shader, right? So I'm going to go ahead and type emission so that I'm not confusing it with anything else. We'll delete the principal BSDF and add an emission shader for it because, yeah. And let's increase the strength to about 10. 10 is too much, so let's go 5. Okay, and I'll go ahead and add another emission shader here, and let's increase it to 10. I'm gonna change the color of this to red, and the other one, let's keep it white for now. We'll go ahead and add a mix shader and just plug it in between both the emission shaders, and we're gonna combine both of them. And then I'll add a color ramp and just add it to the factor of a shader, and then add a layer weight node and take the facing from this and add it to the factor. Right, so as soon as I do that, it just goes ahead and gives me that slight effect. I'm gonna flip the color ramp and bring these a little bit closer so that I can get that. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to basically get a border of this red color around the emission shader, right? So let's bring it a little bit closer. Actually, to do a better job of it, I'm gonna go ahead and add another UV sphere. Now this, I'm gonna delete it later on. This is just to make sure that I can see what I'm doing. Because of the glass, the things are distorted and it just doesn't give me the right effect, right? So yeah, now I can see it better. So as you can see that there is a red glow around it, and I'm just gonna make sure that I have a better visibility here. So okay, now let's go ahead and add a noise texture, and we'll take the factor from this and add it to the blend of our layer weight node, and let's increase the noise a little bit, increase the details and roughness. I don't know, let's reduce it a bit, and let's add a little bit of distortion, right? So we have our outer glow ready. Now the what we're going to do is we're going to create colors for the inner part of it as well. So I'm going to add another color ramp here, take the color input and put it in the color, take the color output, put it in the color of the emission, and let's increase the emission to 10. We are going to add another noise texture here, and let's take the factor, put it into the factor, and bring this black closer to the white so that I can see what's happening. And let's reduce scale to about, this seems okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the color of this to somewhere light yellow, and for this one let's make it red, right? So yeah, let's go back to our object now. Let's make sure that it's applied correctly. So this looks kind of okay. Can increase the scale or play with the scale just to get the desired effect. I'm going to increase the details to 16 just to get this a nice fall off around both of these colors. And let's actually make it slightly orangish. Yep, this looks really good. So yeah, our object's pretty much ready, and I think our texture is also ready. The only thing that I'll probably change in this is that I'll go back to my glass texture, and I'll go ahead and reduce the color a little bit towards the darker side, because we already have emission coming in from the inside, right? So we don't want the outer part to be glowing as well. So yeah, I guess we are pretty much done. That's how you create the object using the simple deform modifier and the curve modifier. I have created these few animations that you see on your screen right now using this same method. So I really hope that this was useful to you guys and you liked it. If you liked it, don't forget to like, the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to learn more about modifiers, just click on the bottom left of your screen right now. And if you like abstract art, just click on the top left of your screen. All right, then I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you so much for hanging out so far.